Hey everybody, Max here. This is part 2 in a video series where I talk about the 200 watt solar charging station install that I'm doing here in my garage. So in part 1, if you missed it, I just talk about why I'm doing this. I go over the diagram of how I'm going to put everything together, and that was pretty much it. Now in part 2, we're actually going to do the install of the components on the inside of the garage, the solar charger, the batteries, wiring everything together. So that's what we're going to go over in this video. In part 3, when we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and put the 2 panels right there on the southern facing roof here of the garage. So stay tuned for part 3 coming up after this. All right, let's get going.
So here's my plan for mounting the gear. Right up there, actually right there, is where I'm going to poke the wires coming in from the solar panel right through the wall, and they're going to come feeding out of there. And then I'm going to mount the gear to the wall right there. And instead of just screwing everything into drywall, which I think would be kind of messy, I might just screw it all into a piece of wood. And so I found this in my shop. It was actually here when we bought the place. Initially, I was going to go out and buy wood, and thanks to government lockdowns and inflation, wood is crazy expensive right now. So I'm going to use what I got. It's a nice piece of wood. It's even finished. And you know what else? My grandpa gave me this built this for me, actually, this old dresser when I was a kid in the 80s. Yes, I grew up in the 80s. They were awesome. I was going to give it away on OfferUp amongst a bunch of other stuff that he built for me, but you know what? It kind of matches the color, and I think I'm just going to keep it there, and that's where, you know, a lot of the battery charging station's going to sit. So that's going to be right underneath, and I'm going to have the wood panel up on the wall right there next to it. And I think it's going to look real nice, like oak. All right, here we go. So here's the charge controller, and as you can see, there's a little battery symbol here, and that's where I'm going to run the wires, positive and negative, straight down to the batteries. And I'm using 10 gauge wire for this, and then I've got the batteries down here, the Renogy's. I'm using 2 gauge wire on that, and I'll probably use 2 gauge wire to run over to the inverter as well. I'll show you guys all of that once it's done. Here's the load output, and the load output's going to go right here to this fuse panel, which I'll attach any DC components to. There's the NOCO. So since nothing is hooked up yet, I've just got the NOCO charging these batteries on a trickle. I'm just keeping them topped off. And I'll leave this here, but of course I'll eventually, once everything is up and running, I'll unplug the NOCO, and it'll be a emergency only use if the batteries ever fall below a certain charge. So you'll notice I bought 2 of these Renogy 100 amp hour batteries, and that's because I wanted to have, you know, around 200 amp hours or so of storage available. Renogy does also make a 200 amp hour battery. I just wanted to mention that. But each one of these 100 amp hour batteries weighs 64 pounds each. I mean, they're heavy. To getting them out here, it's like, whoo, whoo, whoo. It's not like a car battery. The 200 amp hour version of these is 128 pounds. 128 pounds. So if you're a bodybuilder, get that one. But otherwise, if you're a normal human being, I would recommend getting 2 of these. They're heavy enough by themselves. And you can just, you know, wire them in parallel or series, depending on how you want to set things up. I did it parallel here. Keep everything 12 volts. And so, yeah. Also, I could have done this all at 24 volts. I decided to keep everything, the panels in parallel at 12 volts, batteries in parallel at 12 volts, simply because the inverter is 12 volts, and I don't want to have to step down the voltage. It's just an extra step. My panels are super close to the system, so there's no real benefit of running all of this at 24 volts to keep the amperage low. So I'm running it at 12 volts, slightly higher amperage. But the wires are going to be short, so it's no big deal. So anyway, just a little bit of insight into how I set this up and why I chose what I did. So for that 10 gauge wire that I'm running, got to have some lugs to attach to the batteries. And so I'll put a link in the description for you on what this is, but it's just a little collection of different copper lugs for different size wires. They've also got the little heat sinks in there for you. So, you know, the bolts on the batteries take a much larger size like that. But they've also got ones for smaller bolts, which I'm sure I'll find handy at some point. So let's get these put on. I'll show you how this works. I bought this pair of lug crimpers, and I'll put a link in the description for you on that as well. It's got little dials here, and you dial it from either 1 gauge all the way up to 8 gauge, depending on the type of wire size that you're going to crimp. If you have a person to help you with this, I recommend it. I'm here on video by myself, and it's going to be tricky. If you're doing it by yourself, you might think about like maybe mounting it in there to kind of get it held by the crimpers before you attach the wire. Like I said, man, this is tough. There you go. It's kind of already being held there. Then the trick is getting the wire fed into the back, holding it there, and crimping it. And there you go. Now use a heat sink gun or a heat gun. Melt that. Looks nice. And that's ready to go onto the battery. About to put the positive wire into the charge controller. I was going to show you, you got to pull this off first. There's a couple screws you got to remove. And then you've got access to these screws here. So all you've got to do is take your wire, positive wire, feed it up in a little hole here after you twist it a bit. There it goes. And then screwdriver and righty-tighty until it's tight in there. Nice and easy. Lots of turning of the screw. Holy moly. There you go. Great. That's it. Nice and easy. Now I'm going to put this on a switch. Here's one of the switches I bought. Again, link in the description for what I got this, where I got this. It's going to go like that. Basically, battery with the little arrow pointing down. It's kind of easy to know that that means it's on. And then when we want to turn it off, be like that. And this is just so I can disconnect the power downstream of the charge controller if I ever need to do work and just, you know, want to be extra safe. So that's the intent there. It's got a couple of screws on the back here, bolts, and again I'm just going to use that same lug which goes around that, so I'm just going to crimp the red wire to that. One and one, that'll be it. Nice and easy. Look how nice that looks, huh? I'm gonna put it right there. And this came with some machine screws, but I'm going into wood, so I'm gonna use these cabinet screws. I think they'll probably work just right. All right, progress so far. Power from the charge controller to the battery successful. I can turn it on, righty, and this actually powers up. Powered up off the batteries right now, and then tells me that the batteries are at 12.9 volts. It's kind of cool. And then I could send power over to the inverter, turn the inverter on, and it also says it's getting 12.9 volts. So, woohoo, this is working. Still got a few more things to do. I need to put here's the smart shunt. I need to put a little voltmeter there, just so we can have another way of monitoring volts and amperage. And then I also have a cool little voltmeter here that I'm going to use for the DC, which I still haven't wired up the DC fuses. But, you know, this is looking really good so far. Happy it's working. I'm going to shut these off for now. And that is the inverter saying, I don't have power anymore. Useful. So cool. I'm going to call it a night. It's getting cold and dark out here, so I'll talk to you guys again in the morning. Good morning. Did you sleep well? I did. This is the temperature sensor for the charger controller. See that? Woo. Hope we can focus on that. I couldn't figure out what this was, and I read the instruction manual, and it didn't even say. It just said, this is the temperature sensor. I assumed it was probably for the batteries, and I talked to my buddy Scott at Shamrock Creek. Check out his YouTube channel. He's pretty awesome. Way ahead of me on this stuff. And he confirmed, yeah, it's for sensing the temperature of the battery, and the charge controller will actually adjust how it charges based on the temperature, because batteries charge differently in different temperatures. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to hook this up to the charge controller. and run the wire straight down to sit on the battery. I think, you know, it would have been better if they had had a little way to clamp this to it, but maybe not. Maybe it doesn't matter. So it's just going to sit down there. All right. So just FYI, that's what it's for. All right, check it out. We got the load negative run here to the top of the fuse panel, and then the positive going out the bottom, and then I connected a little voltmeter. You can see it's 12.7 volts are going through that right now. And then I also got the smart shunt wired up with a voltmeter here. You can see right now it's saying that there's 12.7 volts and not a whole lot of load in terms of amperage. But you know what we could do is hook something up to the inverter like this heat gun, which I'll use on low. But let's see what happens when we turn it on. Yeah, so 8.33 amps and 103 watts being used. So it is, and shut it off. Yeah, so it is going to be a great tool for me to see, you know, what the current load is on the system. So I'm looking forward to getting this all wired up with the solar panels coming in from the outside. So that's going to be the next step of this project. All right, so that wraps it up for this video. Thanks so much for watching. And the big takeaway on this video is, if a doofus like me can learn to do this stuff, so can you. You've probably noticed I use wrong words for things. I mean, I am totally new to this. I'm watching a bunch of YouTube videos like you are. I'm talking to people who know how to do this. I'm kind of fumbling my way through it best I can. But that's what we do, right? That's how we learn. And the next time I do one of these, I'm going to know a lot more about how to get things done. I'll probably learn from my mistakes. So that's the idea, right? So anyway, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for part 3 of this video where I put the solar panels on the roof.